the little community out of Houston where you could go and enjoy a peaceful day at the beach with your family. They're a very close-knit family. They stayed on that larger piece of property. They stayed to themselves.
He had a hamburger stand called Burger Smith's, and he would tell stories about aliens. He gave him the recipe for the hamburgers.
He was poor in day-to-day life, but a millionaire as far as property was concerned.
How did you find out that George had been killed?
Lorraine called me.
The head of the body was completely mutilated.
All around George was blood spatter.
Definitely ambush style.
It was a terrible death. I first knew something was not right when I advised Lorraine. Basically, she went straight into telling me everything that they did.
And give your full name?
Margaret Lorraine Smith.
He loved Lorraine. I do know that. Whether she really loved him or not.
I remember we got some calls at night where they were arguing.
Just the slightest triggers will make him mad. Not everything I told you was the truth, but not everything was a lie. I drove him down there and he said he wanted to go to the beach. And I said, I don't want to. I did not kill my husband.
It took her months to plan this. She put it together. She thought it all out. Get George in the right spot, to get Dylan to come up at a certain time. She's a master manipulator.
She needed somebody's help, and that she thinks that I would be someone that could help her. She's like, well, I need somebody that might know how to make someone disappear. I didn't do what they said I did.
The day he let her out, my husband said she's going to run. And she did.
There is video footage of her at the VA hospital carrying 2 duffel bags. There is footage of her at a San Antonio Walmart. She then walks back outside with the duffel bags and gets in the back seat of a maroon Lincoln sedan.
Nobody has heard from her since then.
The kids don't have a father, the kids don't have a mother, and now the kids have nothing to show of their father who worked so hard to get what they had.
She wanted the money and didn't care how she was going to get it. That's just evil.
Just an hour south of Houston lies the small beachfront community of Surfside, Texas. Here, there are no chain hotels, few restaurants, and miles of open beach.
It always stayed, the little community out of Houston where you could go and enjoy a peaceful day at the beach with your family.
The small town is home to only a few hundred permanent residents. And in 2007, George Smith Jr. was one of the most well-known.
He loved the beach. He loved the surf.
He was a longtime local with a big family and big beachfront property.
They've got 4 kids, 2 older and 2 younger.
George and his wife Margaret Lorraine had 4 children: Stormy Summer, Scarlet Sunset, Saffron Sunshine, and Sequoia Sundance.
They're a very close-knit family. They were always together. You really didn't see the kids growing up going to other people's houses. They stayed on that larger piece of property. They stayed to themselves.
The couple was known for their larger-than-life personalities, and they weren't shy about showing their passion for Surfside.
And they were very vocal. If there was something they didn't like in the city, they weren't afraid to approach the council or the mayor or the police chief and voice their opinion.
He brought his kids in there barefoot and all and trying to please.
Former Mayor Larry Davison was often at the helm of those city council meetings with George in attendance, including one where he fought to keep his farm animals.
He had pigs and chickens and cows, and they would get out. He was the only one that had it, and we didn't have any rules against it, and everybody kind of got fed up with it. And so
the farm animals were eventually outlawed. George turned his time and energy to his beachside burger shop.
he had a hamburger stand called Burger Smiths, and he would tell stories about aliens. He gave him the recipe for the hamburgers and all this bizarre stuff and stuff. He was a character.
Best hamburger you'd find in this area.
The restaurant he owned, Burger Smith, was a huge deal down there. It was a staple in the community. It ended up closing down, and now the building doesn't exist anymore.
Known for a signature beach bum look and a very frugal lifestyle,
George looked like he was the poorest guy you'd ever meet.
only those who knew him well knew how much George was truly worth.
But he had a good real estate that was worth a bunch of money.
A lot of people say George was a simple man. He was poor in day-to-day life, but a millionaire as far as property was concerned.
His beachfront property and an old closed-up burger kitchen was prime real estate amid the sand and surf.
The property value itself was great, but the structures they lived in, you know, were just basically, you know, very basic, down-to-earth living, very humble living. He just would not spend much money at all.
Let's go back to August 2007. How did you find out that George had been killed?
Lorraine called me, answered, and I said hello, and she says, Margaret, George is dead. No emotion, no nothing. What? George is dead. That's all she said.
Lorraine, I'm Captain Kinchlow.
Once I made contact with Margaret Lorraine Smith, and I advised her that her husband had passed away, that's when I learned something else.
It was pretty bad as the pieces fell together and stuff like that.
Can I have some water, please?
August 7th, 2007, the beaches that attract tourists to the quiet community of Surfside, Texas, turned into a crime scene.
We're getting several calls saying that there's a body on the beach.
Two beachgoers on an early morning walk made the startling discovery.
The head of the body was completely mutilated.
A victim beaten so brutally he was unrecognizable.
You could tell there was major trauma to his body, more so the head, neck area.
Not long into their morning investigation, sheriff's deputies found the victim's wallet and ID.
And they identified him as George Smith of Surfside.
George Smith, the well-known business owner, a devoted father of four, married almost 28 years, found beaten and left for dead.
And I mentioned to him, I wonder if any of this has to do with the disputes between George and Lorraine. It's just the first thing came to my mind.
I first knew something was not right when I advised Lorraine.
Investigators say George was the target of a brutal attack. They started looking for answers by speaking with his wife, Margaret Lorraine.
Basically, she went straight into telling me everything that they did. I didn't ask the questions. It was, this is what happened.
They had good evidence on her that morning that she was there when it happened, or near the time that it happened, and, you know, obviously lured him down there.
And give your full name?
Margaret Lorraine Smith.
Margaret Lorraine Smith on 8/8 of 2007.
Margaret, who went by her middle name Lorraine, was a former EMT and homeschooled all four of their children.
Stormy Summer, Scarlet Sunset, Saffron Sunshine, Sequoia Sundance.
Those are unique names. Did you pick them or did he pick them?
Well, I pretty much picked them and he agreed to them.
And at the time of the murder, she says the family was living apart. Her two youngest, just 10 and 12, were living in North Texas with their older sister. Lorraine and George were living locally, but in separate houses.
We have this agreement right now that he lives out there
Out
at the beach.
at the beach at that house.
And that I live in Angleton.
Okay.
He loved Lorraine. I do know that. Whether she really loved him or not.
After nearly 3 decades together and 4 children, investigators say the relationship turned rocky as Lorraine began to distance herself.
I remember we got some calls at night where they were arguing, and one of them was out of the vehicle, one was in. They actually would call my cell phone direct and avoid the dispatch.
For nearly a year, the former police chief, Randy Smith, says he witnessed the marriage become volatile.
Every time it was really heated. I mean, she was out of breath. Oh my God, he's hitting my car. I'm driving away. She's screaming and crying, and he's upset. There was quite a few incidences that were happening where you could tell things just were so hostile between them at that time. It's like, where's this going?
Lorraine denied harming her husband and instead told investigators that he abused her for years.
It's just the slightest triggers will make him mad. He has slapped at me before, and he punches me, and he'll grow for the throat. He likes to kick you in the knee. He likes to pull hair, or just crunch your face up and pinch it as hard as he can, and he's pretty strong. His favorite thing is verbal abuse, though. Emotional and verbal abuse.
Okay. I'm waiting for you to tell me what happened.
Can I have some water, please?
Over the course of 2 days, Lorraine was interviewed by investigators where they say she gave 2 different stories about the last time she saw her husband alive.
Not everything I told you was the truth, but not everything was a lie. I did go on the beach.
Okay.
Deputies were able to confirm the couple met the night before George was killed. They ate dinner at a local Mexican restaurant known for 99-cent margaritas. Lorraine told investigators George had 6 to 9 drinks, and after dinner she agreed to drive him back to his beach house in his truck. Stopping at a Surfside gas station on the way home, she claims she went inside to buy a Coke.
And when she's inside, she's on the phone with somebody. And at the time, they didn't know who she was on the phone with.
My mouth was just really super dry.
Okay.
So I went in and got a Coke, and came back out. Then I don't know, I got a phone call or something. I don't even remember who it was.
In the audio of the security footage, you can hear Margaret say, "Okay, I see you now," and hangs up the phone as she walks out.
And then I got back in the truck.
So at that point, we can determine that somebody was following them. They're meeting somebody at this gas station.
Deputies say Lorraine drove down to a remote area of the beach where George got out of the truck.
I believe that George had maybe been promised by Margaret some intimate time with her, because at the scene there's a raincoat laid down.
I drove him down there, and he said he wanted to go to the beach. And I said, "I don't want to. I'll drop you off at the house." And he's like, "No, go to the beach." And I thought, well, what's it going to hurt to go drive out on the beach for just a little bit? But I knew I was probably going to have to, fend him off, because he was already going like that, and I just didn't want to deal with it.
Lorraine claims she thwarted his attempts for intimacy and instead urged her husband back in the vehicle.
Okay, so you drove off and you came back.
I came back once, and then he wouldn't get in the car, and then I turned around and I drove off, and that's the last I saw of him.
Dylan Lowry, D-Y-L-A-N, L-A-U-G-H-R-E-Y.
We don't think it was long before Dylan came out of the darkness and handled the job.
I was the investigator on call when I received this call.
In August 2007, George Smith was found murdered on the beach in Surfside, Texas.
I'll never forget it. George Smith, his feet were facing the sand dunes. Head was at the water, laying on his back.
Investigators say it was a violent and brutal death. He suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head.
So this wasn't just one hit over the head. This was several strikes to the head.
They say his skull was broken.
The head of the body was completely mutilated.
And his face unrecognizable.
All around George was blood spatter.
Dylan Lowry, D-Y-L-A-N, L-A-U-G-H-R-E-Y.
Dylan Lowry is serving a life sentence for the murder of George Smith.
I'm a laid-back kind of individual. I don't get riled up too easily, too much anymore like I used to when I was younger, but...
A Marine who deployed to Iraq and Kuwait, Dylan says his life was filled with battles. He had a baby right after high school and decided to enlist. The father of now 3 admits he was in a downward spiral by the time he was discharged. Living on a friend's couch, he was relying on food pantries and fell into drugs.
I found myself trying to do something, you know, to earn a little extra money. I got arrested.
He was living in these low-income apartments in nearby Clute, Texas, where he says he crossed paths with Margaret Lorraine Smith. In this audio interview, she says she was often visiting a friend named Dwayne at that same complex.
I do have to say that George sometimes thought that Dwayne and I had something going, but we don't. His daughter's 16.
Dylan tells us the first and only time he ever spoke in person with Lorraine, she lured him into a conversation by pretending to buy drugs.
I can tell you, Lorraine Smith was called the crazy lady in the group that Dylan ran around with.
So, did you ever speak with Margaret Lorraine Smith?
One time, I spoke with her the night that she came and asked for me by name. So she reached in her purse, she pulled out some money, she counted it out, she handed it to me, it was $1,500. She said, "How much dope can I buy with $1,500?
He says they walked to the parking lot where the conversation took a turn.
That she needed somebody's help and that she thinks that I would be someone that could help her. She tells me, because you were in the military before. I said, yes, I was in the military. She's like, well, I need somebody that might know how to make someone disappear. She goes on to tell me a story about, well, it's her sister, and her sister's husband is beating her sister and abusing her children, her sister's children, for like 5 years, and she wants somebody to take care of the problem. Her sister's afraid, so she's trying to do it herself. At that point,
we believe that Margaret painted the picture of George of being a monster.
Dylan says he immediately rejected her offer and tried to give back the cash.
You know, the most I do is do drugs and sell drugs. I don't mess around any further than that. You know, I'm in a bad place, but I'm not a dummy.
But investigators say they have witness statements and phone records proving Dylan Lowry was a hired hitman.
There were a few eyewitnesses that came forward. They did provide statements saying they did see Margaret talking to Dylan about hiring him for something. Dylan went on the hunt for a gun to a friend's apartment. The friend didn't have a gun, so he reached behind his door and said, "I have this." And that's what he ended up using to kill George with.
The murder weapon deputies say was a piece of metal called a leaf spring.
A leaf spring is the rear suspension of a vehicle. It's a bunch of pieces of metal, curved metal, and that's what was used.
It was the leaf spring borrowed from a friend that investigators say matched the injuries to George's broken skull.
Just like a lock and key, fit, perfect. And that's when we knew that we found the murder weapon. It was a leaf spring.
The night of George's death, deputies say Lorraine was driving him home and stopped at that Surfside gas station. Investigators say she went inside and made a phone call.
So the phone number was found to belong to a female who told investigators that she loaned the phone to Dylan that night.
She did call my homegrown cell phone, which I was using to sell drugs, right? And she called twice. First time I hung up because I didn't recognize the number. Second time I answered and found out it was her. Told her that I tried to give her money back. She didn't take it. kicked rocks, she's jacked, and hung up on him.
But investigators say surveillance video captures a different conversation.
Pretty much like, where you at? Okay, I see you. And she's looking out the glass window of the Valero gas station. And that's when I knew, okay, then he had to have followed them out to Surfside.
I believe the call was Dylan talking to Margaret and Margaret making sure that Dylan was following the correct truck.
That puts him at Surfside, doesn't put him where the murder occurred.
Dylan's defense attorney says it was a circumstantial case based on other witness testimony.
They found a witness who testified that he saw Dylan that morning and he had blood on him.
Charged with capital murder, Dylan was facing potential execution under Texas law. Jimmy Phillips Jr. says their focus was to keep Dylan alive.
What you're always shooting for, you're always thinking about, and you spend all your time preparing for, is whether or not this person is going to die or he's going to live. And that's it.
After a 2-week trial, the jury found Dylan Lowry guilty of George Smith's murder. The prosecutor agreed to forego the death sentence. The 25-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But sitting inside a maximum security state prison in East Texas.
Even though I didn't do what they said I did, in the eyes of many people, I must have, because I was convicted, and I'm now doing a life without parole sentence.
After nearly 13 years behind bars, Dylan Lowry still maintains his innocence in the death of George Smith. We reached out to the Brazoria County District Attorney's Office regarding Dylan Lowry's claim of innocence. They did not respond.
I never knew who he was until trial. The end of the trial really hurt because his daughter got on the stand and gave the victim impact statement. And during her impact statement, I found out that he was a big brother. He had served in the Marine Corps.
Dylan was convicted of killing a fellow Marine who sat unsuspecting and unarmed on a dark beach.
Definitely ambush style.
It was a terrible death.
And the accused mastermind, George's wife and the mother of their children, told deputies it was all an accident.
I didn't mean to do it.
Honey, I know that. But guess what? It's okay.
No, it's not.
It's okay. Yeah, it is.
I'm gonna go to jail.
Lorraine did go to jail, charged with her husband's murder. But 15 years later, no one knows where she is.
Dylan is now spending a life sentence in prison, and Margaret is yet to be found.
The day he let her out, my husband said she's gonna run. And she did.
One month after George Smith was found beaten and left for dead, his wife Margaret Lorraine Smith and her acquaintance Dylan Lowry were charged with capital murder, each facing a potential death sentence. Dylan was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Lorraine, who pled not guilty, was able to make bail after a judge reduced her original bond.
This is her indictment for the murder that she never showed up to court for.
She got out, she stayed around for a little while, and after Dylan got convicted, they called her case to trial and she was gone.
Deputies say their investigation began to point towards Lorraine from the very beginning.
From the restaurant to the margaritas.
It took her months to plan this. She put it together. She thought it all out.
And then it became very clear it was planned once she got on the phone and said, "Yep, I see you. Okay, follow us." And then leading him to the beach where he was then murdered.
You could tell George Smith's shoe prints in the sand got out on the passenger side of the truck and came straight to where he was laying. Wasn't walking around up and down the beach. It was none of that. Straight out of the vehicle to where he was laying.
The motive, they say, was greed.
He had some great property worth a lot of money, and he wasn't up to selling it.
He would not sell the beach because it was at the time it was well worth over $1 million, that beachfront property out there.
But investigators say property records showed Lorraine was able to sell another piece of land in nearby Matagorda County.
Lorraine had some property owned by George Smith that she forged his signatures, and she had sold.
So she was well on the move to try and liquidate some stuff and come up with some cash.
She never gave George his check.
Margaret opened an account for just the kids and put the money for George in that account that he couldn't access. So he didn't even know that that land was sold for a while.
That's the money also that she helped pay Dylan with to kill her husband.
Investigators say the day after George's body was found, Lorraine called them to change her original statement.
Not everything I told you was the truth, but not everything was a lie.
Before she went and gave the statement, she went to City Hall to get a paper notarized, and that paper said that she was signing the rights of her two youngest children to her older daughter.
So basically, you just signed their consent for them to raise them.
Well, I mean, yeah,
I mean, for the school and everything else.
Yeah, it just, yeah, my wish is for them to be there with them right now because I don't know.
I knew that she had more involvement then, because why else would you want to give custody of your two younger children to the daughter?
Days leading up to the murder, he did handwrite another will that took her out of the will and left everything to the kids. Unfortunately, that will was never finalized through the courts, and so when he did pass, she did get everything.
That high-dollar beachfront property George refused to sell was now in Lorraine's hands, and this prized Surfside land is what investigators say she used as collateral with her bondsperson in order to make bail.
I was somewhat shocked when the judge in that court let her out on bond.
Lorraine made bond, and one of the stipulations is that she had an ankle monitor on.
The day he let her out, my husband said she's going to run. And she did.
It was the day of the trial when they called her name in the hallway and nobody stood up. A few days before that, Margaret said she had to go to the doctor. This is what led her to leave the county legally with an ankle monitor while on bond.
When Lorraine didn't show up for her court date, that's when we learned Lorraine's ankle monitor was removed.
There is video footage of her at the VA hospital carrying 2 duffel bags.
She walked through the hospital and right out the other doors and never seen again until later on in San Antonio at a Walmart.
When she goes to that Walmart in San Antonio, she collects a money order that she had sent herself at this Walmart. She then walks back outside with the duffel bags and gets in the back seat of a maroon Lincoln sedan that had dropped her off prior.
Nobody has heard from her since then. The bondsman was not able to find her.
Since she took off and left, that land is all forfeited, which it should have went to the kids, but they didn't get anything.
To put that up for your bond and then abscond on your bond, the kids don't have a father, the kids don't have a mother, and now the kids have nothing to show of their father who worked so hard to get what they had.
They never inherited anything.
No, they were left with nothing.
With Within days of George Smith's brutal murder on Surfside Beach, the crime scene became a memorial.
We had it down there at the spot where she killed him. And there were surfboards and stuff standing up. It was nice. A lot of people showed up,
including Margaret Lorraine Smith. She attended with her 4 children, 2 older and 2 younger. Mourners shared memories, lit torches, and held hands. A beachside barefoot ceremony befitting a man who loved the sand and sea.
I think the kids and the community really need a closure to this.
As the accused mastermind lives free.
Knowing that she's out there, you know it's not right. She shouldn't be living free.
The Texas Rangers and U.S. Marshals have joined the hunt to find Lorraine, adding her to Texas's 10 most wanted fugitives, creating new age progression pictures. Take a close look. She has a dark mole under her right eye.
Without doubt, she's going to probably look like those age enhancement.
They want to find the woman they say was capable of plotting to kill her husband, who allegedly hired a hitman to do the job and then lured the victim to his favorite place.
Get George in the right spot, to get Dylan to come up at a certain time when she walks away from him, you know, on the beach and beats him to death. She's a master manipulator.
And then they say to gamble with the only thing her children had left to inherit, their father's land.
They lost their father, they lost their mother, and everything that the father was possibly going to pass over to them. They don't even get that.
Lorraine was last seen on surveillance video leaving the San Antonio Walmart in August 2009, carrying 2 duffel bags.
There's been many tips with no real credible leads at this point.
Nobody knows what happened, but she just disappeared.
If you could say anything to Margaret to try to convince her to turn herself in, what would you say?
It's time.
Boxes and boxes of files associated with this case are now preserved in the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office. George's own skull remains a piece of evidence stored with the Brazoria County Medical Examiner. Without her arrest, this remains the county's only fugitive murder case.
I just feel definitely for sure she'll be found one of these days. I'm just shocked she hasn't come forward herself and say, I'm tired.
The hitman was found and sentenced, but for friends and family of George, the justice is still not complete with the accused mastermind free. As the years have gone by, his own children have now grown, declining to speak on camera, but telling us, we pray she is caught. We live with the scars she created in our lives daily. We are trying to move on with our lives and live in the present as much as possible.
She wanted the money and didn't care how she was going to get it. That's just evil.
Margaret Lorraine Smith is currently the most wanted female fugitive in the state of Texas. If you have information regarding her whereabouts, please call Texas Crime Stoppers. Their number is 1-800-252-TIPS. An anonymous tip leading to her arrest could earn you a reward of up to $12,500.